Hey everyone, Reflected here, and today I'd like to introduce the F4U Corsair and talk about the cockpit layout as well as the different systems and how to manage them in flight. If you just want to hop in and fly, this tutorial may not be relevant for you. But if you're like me and you'd like to have a deeper understanding of how this iconic warbird works, then sit back and enjoy the video. I'm also going to release specific tutorials about the engine start, takeoff, landing, and carrier landing. Here we are in the cockpit of the DCS F4U Corsair. Magnitude has done a fantastic job. I really love the textures with all the weathering, paint chips. It looks very realistic. The cockpit itself is not very ergonomic, in my opinion. The design could have been given more thought by Chance Mod. There are other warbirds that have a much smarter cockpit layout, such as the P-51 or German aircraft in general. Okay, let's sweep the cockpit from left to right and go through each system. Let's begin right here with the wing fold controls. This is a control lever that has 3 positions: fold, neutral, and spread. You need hydraulic pressure to make it work. The Corsair's wings can be folded up outward of the lowest part of the band wings. It's a requirement on all carrier aircraft because the space is very limited on deck and in the hangar bay. The Navy loved this design because the Corsair could fold its wings while taxiing forward after landing aboard. It didn't require any people to swing the wings back like in case of the Hellcat. This made the pace of the recoveries much quicker. On the downside, when there was more than 30 knots of wind over the deck, it produced enough lift on the wings so that they couldn't always be spread without help. The Corsair had to be jockeyed from side to side in order to spread the wings. As you spread the wings, a warning horn will blow throughout the last 7 degrees. When the wings are fully extended, the small doors at the wing joints close, indicating that the hinge pins are in position. But it's still not safe to fly like this. The hinge pins have to be locked by pulling and rotating this D handle. That will silence the warning horn. When you fold the wings, you need to unlock the hinge pins and then move the handle to the fold position. It's very important to note that during flight, the lever has to be in the spread position at all times. Just to the inside, you have 2 red loops. These are the manual release controls of the wing pylons. You pull them out and the drop tank or ordnance is gone. The Corsair has 3 pylons, 2 under the wings and 1 on centerline. The wing pylons can be released manually, like we've just seen, or electrically, like when you're dropping a bomb. We'll get back to this later. Above these, there's a lamp. By twisting it, you can switch between 2 functionalities: UV lamp or spotlight. Over here is the place of the handle used for releasing tow targets, but it's been removed from our Corsair. Then you have your trim controls: rudder in the back, then the elevator, and the aileron. The elevator trim is controlled by this large wheel here. Trim settings are quite important in such a powerful warbird, especially during takeoff and landing. This T-handle is the tailwheel lock control. Pull it up and twist it to unlock the tailwheel. Twist it and push it down to lock it. When unlocked, the tailwheel is free castering, like the wheels of a shopping cart, or the Spitfire for example. If you lock it, it can only move a few degrees and it helps you maintain direction on takeoff and landing. The idea is the same as on the Messerschmitt 109. You need to unlock it for ground ops and taxiing. You need to taxi in ass turns, otherwise you can't see where you're going because of the long hose nose. For takeoff and landing, you lock it to keep your run straight, except for carrier landings. For those, you need to keep it unlocked. It's because as you catch a wire, it may swing the aircraft sideways a bit, and if the tailwheel is locked, it may be damaged as it hits the deck. But this is the subject of another tutorial. Just inwards the elevator trim wheel, you see a handle. It's not your handbrake, it's a hydraulic hand pump. When the engine is off, or if the engine-driven hydraulic pump fails, you can use it to produce some hydraulic pressure to operate whatever you need. It's not very effective though. Just under that, you see a CO2 bottle with a valve on top. This is your emergency landing gear release valve. When you have a hydraulic failure, lower the gear handle, then open the valve to blow your gears. What a great placement. This is exactly where I want to blindly look for that valve in an emergency situation. I've read that many pilots lost some skin off their hands and fingers before finding the valve. Forward of that is your fuel tank selector valve. Older Corsairs had 2 tanks in the wings, but this later model is different. You have a main tank with the capacity of 180 gallons. Then you have a 50-gallon standpipe inside that acts as the reserve tank. You use it solely for startup, takeoff, and landing. That gives you a total of 230 gallons of internal fuel. Additionally, you can attach drop tanks to both the wing pylons or the centerline pylon. In early war photos, you see a lot of that typical 160-gallon centerline drop tank, whereas as of early 1945, you'll see an elongated 165-gallon tank on the wing pylons. Most of the time, only one was carried, attached to the right wing pylon to counter the left wing heaviness of the plane due to the torque. Obviously, you use your fuel in your external tank first, and then switch to your main tank. The only indication of the drop tank getting empty is your engine cutting out, so you should be alert and switch to the main tank before your engine stops over the middle of the ocean. Just forward of that, you'll see the landing gear handle. You lower it by moving it forward. You'll notice that there are 2 slots. If you move the handle inwards and then forward, you lower the main wheels only, not the tail wheel. They will act as your dive brakes. This is one of the main reasons why the Corsair has bent wings. Not just a large propeller, that's a common misconception. The main wheels had to be quite short so that they can be lowered at higher speeds and act as dive brakes. The speed limit to operate both is a staggering 260 knots. Just be careful and make sure you lower it to the correct slot if you don't want to land with your tail wheel up. Above that, you have a few circuit breakers and then your throttle quadrant. The propeller pitch control is back here, and you move the lever down to increase RPM and up to decrease RPM. For smaller, more precise adjustments, you can also turn this knob on the control lever. This is not a friction lock. Then outboard, you have your throttle with the radio mic button on top. If you move the lever fully forward, breaking the safety wire, to the last 3/8 of an inch, it operates the water injection micro switch. It's 50% alcohol and 50% water, and you have 8.5 minutes of liquid stored in 3 tanks to cool the engine and give you maximum emergency power. When you retard the throttle, water injection will be turned off automatically. Careful, at low altitudes, it's possible to overboost the engine. Throttle and RPM go hand in hand. The biggest no-no is to run at high manifold pressure but low RPM. That can overboost and kill the engine. So when you add power, increase the RPM first, then the throttle, and when you reduce power, pull the throttle back first and only then the RPM. There are some manifold RPM combos that are worth remembering, then you'll be safe. At max RPM, so 2700, you can apply anything up to full power. These are your combat settings. You use it in a dogfight or tactical climbs. Then your max continuous is 2550 RPM and 43 to 49 inches of manifold, depending on what blower you're in. This is the highest setting at which the engine can run indefinitely. Don't apply more manifold pressure than this when your RPM is at 2550. Then you have 2250 RPM and 35 inches, which is your max cruise. With the manifold at 35 inches or below, you are safe to decrease the RPM to even 1700 if you like. Your Corsair will sound like a giant sewing machine, but you save a lot of fuel, and that's always a good thing when the only place you can land is a tiny boat in the middle of the ocean. The next lever is your supercharger control, or blower. If you fly the P-47 Thunderbolt, it should all be familiar to you. So in order to run an engine, you need a very specific ratio of fuel and air. As you go higher, the air becomes thinner, so you need less fuel to maintain that perfect ratio. But hey, if you decrease both, you lose power, right? You can always add more fuel, but how do you add more air? That's where the supercharger comes into the picture. It compresses the air and forces it down the throat of your engine. While the P-47 supercharger is a gradual lever, the blower on the Corsair has 3 positions: neutral, low, and high. Neutral or fully forward is easy. The supercharger is off. As you climb, you lose manifold pressure, so eventually you switch to low blower like a second gear. And even higher up, you'll need high blower to give you the desired manifold. In the manuals, you'll find all kinds of prescribed altitudes for switching at different power settings, but you don't need to memorize them as long as you understand this rule of thumb. If you need more power, increase the throttle first. If that's not enough to reach the desired manifold, then move the blower into a higher position. Likewise, if you want to decrease power, shift the blower to a lower position, and then, if the manifold is still not low enough, you move the throttle back. In a nutshell, it's because the supercharger produces an insane amount of heat, and you don't want to run it when you don't have to. By the way, rule of thumb is the shifts will occur at around 10 and 20,000 feet, very roughly, depending on how much power you need. Last but not least, you have your mixture lever with 3 positions. Cutoff, meaning no fuel is fed to the engine, auto lean, and auto rich. Auto rich is used for startup, takeoff, and landing, and auto lean is used for everything else. Yes, you heard it right, even for combat, using war emergency power. It was found that it gives better performance than auto rich. In flight, you only need to go auto rich if your cylinder head temperatures run away. Fuel also acts as a coolant, and if you have less, the engine runs hotter. Just ahead of that, you have a handle with a red button. That's how you fire your HVR rockets. Above, you have another one of those lamps we've seen before, and just ahead, you have your flaps control. The lever has 6 positions: 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees. What's interesting is that the flaps have a safety valve, and they can be blown back by the airflow. So if you leave them down, they will slowly retract as you accelerate, then extend as you slow down again. This means you won't get full flaps unless you slow down enough, even if the lever is at 50 degrees. You can also use them as maneuver flaps in the 10-20 setting to tighten your turn circle at low speeds around 150 knots, or help you slow down to optimum turning speed. Behind the flap lever, you have the centerline drop tang mechanical release. This one cannot be dropped electrically. It has 3 positions: flight-lock, release, and attach. I guess in the attach position, the latches are not forced open nor closed, so the ground crew can attach the tank to the aircraft. Moving inboard and down, you'll find the magnetos and the landing gear position indicators, 3 little balls moving for each wheel. Inboard of that, those are your gun chargers. The guns are charged hydraulically and fired electrically. You press and turn the knobs to charge the guns, otherwise they won't fire. Then you have your rudder pedals that have a toe brake axis as well, which are your wheel brakes, like in any other US fighter. The control stick is rather simple. It has a trigger in the front to fire the guns, and a button on the top to release your bombs, wing drop tanks, or tiny TIM rockets. If you look up, you'll see your instrument panel. Pretty straightforward. An RPM gauge, the needle shows the hundreds, and you see the thousands in that little window on the left. Then your altimeter in feet, manifold pressure in inches of mercury, directional gyro, airspeed indicator, the outer circle goes up to 200 knots, and above that, the inner circle takes over. Then you have the ball and a compass. There are 3 lamps above these. The one on the left illuminates when you have only 3 minutes of water injection liquid left. When you run out, the light goes off. Then a stall warning lamp with a test button. You want to make sure it's off because you're not stalling and not because the lamp doesn't work. And then a red light for the carburetor air temperature. It doesn't have a gauge. When the lamp goes on, it's too hot. You need to shift to a lower blower or open the intercooler more. Then you have a gyro horizon. Don't forget to uncage it. A vertical speed indicator, a clock that will be very useful for navigation, and the cylinder head temperature gauge that will be your main source of information on when to open and close your cowl flaps. The red line is at 260 Celsius, but for continuous operations you want to keep it below 230. Below, there is a combined gauge that shows your oil and fuel pressures as well as your oil temperature. Moving further down, there's your fuel gauge showing the internal fuel only, hydraulic pressure gauge, a voltmeter, a fuel pressure gauge that's in-up, just a leftover from previous models, and an accelerometer showing the G's you pulled. Just inboard, that's the main fuel tank pressure regulator. When the fuel tank is punctured in combat, or you need to make a forced landing in adverse conditions, you can release pressure by pulling the handle aft. From just below the instrument panel, you can pull out a tray with the plotting board. Yes, this is how World War II pilots navigated, plotting their flight with a pencil, noting for how long they flew on what course and how fast. Hardcore, isn't it? Before we move on to the right, let's have a look at what's above the instrument panel. These are your weapon system control switches. On the left, it's a three-way switch that controls the gun camera. You can set it to gun or forward firing. The letter is for rocket attacks. The camera will start recording when you press the trigger. Then you have the master arm switch. With this one off, none of the weapons will work. Then there are three switches to turn on your guns: outboard, center, and inboard. If you like, you can save ammo by firing only a pair or two pairs, not all 6 guns at the same time. There are 6 ammunition boxes, 2 per gun in each outer panel, supplying 400 rounds of ammunition to each inboard and center gun, and 375 rounds to each outboard gun. The guns are charged hydraulically and fired electrically. The next one is your gun sight switch that has an alternate position in case the on position doesn't work. In-game, they are the same. You adjust the brightness with this knob here. The gun sight must look familiar to Thunderbolt jockeys. It's the good old Mark 8 reflector sight. To the right of it, you have the bomb controls. You select the left and right pylons for release, a bomb arming switch, and a center pylon release switch. To the right, on the right side of the cockpit, is your rocket control box for the HVRs. You turn on the system using the switch under the red guard. The switch next to it arms the rockets, and the switch down there selects whether you want to fire a pair or salvo all of them. A light will be illuminated on the box when your switchology is correct and the rockets are ready to be fired. Looking at the right side panel, over here you have the recognition lights panel. There are 3 lights on the underside of the right wing, a red, a green, and an amber one, and it's used for night communication and IFF. You can switch each to steady or flash, so you can flash a Morse code using this button just aft of the switches. Then you have 3 big levers that are very important, and you better assign it to your keyboard or HOTAS. The innermost is the oil cooler. The oil coolers are in the wing roots, making that high-pitched sound that gave the Corsair the name Whistling Death. There are 2 flaps behind, on the underside of the wing, that can be opened if the oil temperature gets too high. Don't leave them open if you don't have to. They generate a lot of drag. They cost you about 12 knots when fully open. The next one is your intercooler. It's on the underside of the fuselage. If the carburetor air warning light comes on, you want to open this. Rule of thumb is it can be closed in neutral blower. You open it halfway in low and high blower, and fully when you fly at high power like in combat. This costs you the least amount of drag, only 10 knots. Because you can't see either of these flaps, you have 2 indicators just forward of the levers, similar to the landing gear indicators. The cowl flaps, however, can be easily seen from the cockpit, and that's what the outboard handle is for, the biggest one. If the cylinder head temperature gets too high, you either open the cowl flaps more, or increase mixture, or reduce power, or increase airspeed. According to the manual, you only need to open it fully on the ground. In the air, 2/3 is enough. Any more than that doesn't give you better cooling, just more drag. Fully open cowl flaps can cost you 15 to 20 knots of airspeed. So close it as much as the cylinder head temps allow. Remember, you can also cool them by decreasing power, increasing airspeed, or enriching your fuel mixture. Moving back, you have your engine controls, the battery switch, and the electric auxiliary fuel pump. When switched on, it turns on automatically to pressurize the fuel tank in case the engine-driven main pump fails. You need to turn it on for startup, takeoff, landing, switching tanks, and high power, high altitude ops. Basically, you turn it on before engine start and turn it off before stopping the engine if you don't want to worry about it. We'll go into more detail in the startup tutorial. Next to that, you have your electric primer pump, and under the red guard, the engine starter switch. The engine is started using a cartridge that's inserted to the breech of the starter by the ground crews. Unlike the P-47, where you energize a flywheel, even though the two planes have the same engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. Oh, and the Hellcat too. I'm looking forward to seeing that in DCS. Aft of these, you'll find your external light controls, and then the cockpit light controls. Then a defroster and the pitot heat for cold weather ops, as well as a few more fuses you don't need to worry about. What's on the side of the cockpit is much more interesting: the radio and navigation equipment. The biggest box in the front is your C38 control unit. You turn on the AN/ARC5 radio with the front switch and the AN/ARR2 radio navigation receiver with the one aft of that. In-game, the vacuum tubes take around 5 seconds to warm up. The volume knob is right here in the front. The aft part is to control the radio navigation. This switch can be set to voice so that you use the radio, or CW for continuous wave to use the radio navigation mode. You can select one of the 6 preset channels for the ARR2 and change the pitch of the Morse signal so you can hear it better. With this device, often called YEZB navigation, you can determine your relative position from a signal, like your carrier, for example, using Morse code. I'm going to make a separate tutorial about this. It's super cool, and it will be an important part of all PTO campaigns. Aft of the big box, there's a smaller one, and this is your radio control, the C30A control box. You turn it on using that switch, and then you can select one of the 4 preset VHF channels. The last one is the C26 remote control for your AN/ARR2 radio navigation equipment. If you set it to voice, the preset channel you selected on the C38 unit will be used. If set to CW, this manual tuning dial, or coffee grinder, will activate and you can dial in any frequency you like, even if it's not among your presets. Above these boxes, you'll find a sliding handle. You use it to extend the navigation antenna in order to increase the range of your ZB homing equipment. You only extend it when you use it because it creates drag, albeit very small. In the back, you have your IFF control box. This is important. It only has 6 modes, and by the end of the war, the Japanese managed to replicate it. So if yours is not set to the brief mode, FDO will think your blip on his radar is an enemy, and the task group will open fire at you as you approach. It's not currently modeled in-game. Below that is your arresting hook control. Move the lever forward to lower the hook, and back to raise it. There's a middle parking position, which should be used on the ground with the engine off, so that the hook doesn't drop when you have no hydraulic pressure, and also in combat, because if it gets damaged, you may lose hydraulic fluid, but not if you isolate the hydraulic line to the hook by placing it to the parking position. Another very important thing to keep in mind, on the Corsair, the hook can only be lowered after the tailwheel is down, and the tailwheel cannot be retracted before the hook is raised. There's a mechanical interlock. And below that, you have the oxygen bottle and supply system. You don't need to worry too much about this, but if you fly at high altitude for a long time, keep an eye on your oxygen supply gauge as well as the blinker to make sure it flows freely. Otherwise, you better descend to a lower altitude in a hurry. One more thing I'd like to mention is the canopy controls. You slide the canopy back and forth using this yellow handle on the left. If you want to jettison the canopy, you do that by grabbing these red handles. When you need to ditch, it's important to jettison the canopy and not just open it, because on impact, it may slam shut, potentially injuring you. Maybe even getting stuck, and then you can't get out of the cockpit as it fills with water, and that's a terrible way to die. Alright, this is it. This is all you need to know about the Corsair's cockpit and systems. If I forgot something or said something that's incorrect, please let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned, this is the first of many tutorials. We're gonna go through the engine start procedure, takeoff, landing, carrier ops, and radio navigation too. Alright, thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe and ring the bell for more tutorials and campaign updates. See ya!